In this video, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of a app called MotionCam Pro. It's about $30 app on your phone that basically unlocks your phone and it gives you full access to everything that your phone has to offer. In this case, it unlocked my phone to a degree where I will more often reach for my phone than grabbing any one of the cameras that I have access to. And simply because the image quality is up to par or good enough to the point where it's like, hey, you know what? I can work with this. Just to kind of give you a little bit of context of what this app is and what it is intended for. Um, so this app originally, I used it with my Google Pixel 6 Pro. And what the app does, it allows you to use the entirety of your sensor without any processing initially. And so that way you can use raw video if you would so like. But with the recent updates and the capabilities of the Samsung S25 Ultra and several other phones probably have this as well, is that the app will allow you to record log. So this way you don't necessarily have to go through the trouble of shooting raw video and processing those into cinema DNGs and then converting that into something that you can edit. You could bypass all that, shoot in log, bake in a LUT using a preferred log profile. So in my case, I use S-Log3. And then once you press record, you're shooting the video that you can just share out with your friends. When you open up the app, this is basically what you're looking at. So let's start with this icon, right? Just a quick walkthrough. What that will open up is your option. Not what that does is it rotates between portrait and landscape. Now, typically I'll shoot landscape. And this phone will also allow you to use the entirety of the sensor. So let's look down here, right? You got different resolutions and stuff. So if we look at, well, let's first look at this direct to log video. When you press that, you get different options, right? So you've got direct to log video, raw video, time lapse, burst, photo, and night. Now, I don't typically use any of these options. I go straight to log video because that's the easiest thing to work with. So direct to log video. And then from there, what you may want to do is now up top, you'll see a few options here. First option we're looking at here is the recording bitrate. So if you hit that, a menu is going to essentially pop up. So I just want to add a little darkness while this screen kind of pops out a little bit more. So when you choose the point where it says HVAC 10-bit, or I don't know, it might be something else for you, but what I choose here is the video codec. The Samsung S25 Ultra specifically is capable of shooting in various formats. Now, in order for me to maintain the smallest file size with the greatest quality balance, then I'll typically go with VEC, this one here, HEVC 10-bit 420. So you get 10-bit color. For the most part, it's not 422, but I don't think that really matters unless you're shooting like green screen. So in that case, if you really wanted that, then you can go into ProRes, but then you're gonna run into limitations because now you're recording video based on software limitations, and you might run into runtime limits, capacity limits because these files are significantly larger. So that's why I choose the EVC 10-bit 420. So that's the video codec. Then you got the color space. Now, this is the thing that I feel like that's really important. So the color space here is, this is where you want to get your S-Log. In my case, I work with S-Log. For work, I have Sony cameras. It's just easier with my workflow. So for that reason, I'll just go with Sony S-Gamut 3. If you work with Canon mostly and you want it to match that footage, you could choose Canon Cinema or C-Log. If you're in DaVinci for the most part, maybe you could choose that. I don't have a lot of experience with DaVinci. I don't use Canon on a professional level. Almost all the stuff that we use are FX30s, FX3s. Got an FX2 on the way. Looking forward to sharing some of my learnings with that. But anyway, for the sake of MotionCam, I'll typically choose S-Log3 or S-Gamut 3. And the transfer function, I'll pick S-Log3 because that's what goes with the S-Gamut 3. I don't like the Samsung log. So if you record video using Samsung's native app, the footage to me just looks like garbage. It looks like overly processed cell phone footage. Now you could shoot in log within that and then apply the Samsung LUT, but the colors are just off. It doesn't look good personally. And so for that reason, I'll just avoid that and I'll go straight to S-Log3. Render quality, I'll set it to high. Maximum bit rate, the phone seemingly is allowing a maximum of 160 megabits per second. I have not experienced any, so whatever limitations that seem to exist and I'll talk about the limitations in a little bit, but whatever limitations that seem to exist at 160 megabits per second exists at 100 megabits per second. And 100 megabits per second is your typical 4K video recording bit rate on a lot of various camera devices. And so, but in my case, more data, the better. If I'm not getting any drawback between 100 to 160, I'll just choose 160. Keyframe interval, the default was 30, so I left it at 30. Now, this is where the real advantage of using MotionCam and baking in a LUT. Now, in my case, initially I was using Sony S-Log3 Direct 709 LUT, but I always found that I would need to still tweak that footage until I downloaded Gerald Undone LUT. I guess that's what it's called. And so he had a so basically he has a Sony LUT that you could apply to S-Log3. And so I just went ahead and applied that here. And I said 0% transparency in the sense that I want the full LUT to be applied. And then I'm not using any presets for my render settings, so I just left that. Everything else I just kind of left default, right? Now you could play around with all of this with relation to the saturation, contrast, and all that. But I just left it as a default. Sharpness and detail, leave that down. Everything else is just basically where it's at. And so these are the settings in the first menu item, which is the bitrate. Everything that you see up here, for the most part, it's all the same thing, right? So it doesn't matter which one you select, it's just going to bring up that same menu. So started with the codec, right? And then moved our way down to the bitrate and the LUT and all that good stuff. So all of that will be showcased here. Now, the thing that I wanted to kind of point out is when you're applying a LUT, right? You click on manage, right? And this is where you can import particular LUTs. One thing that you want to ensure, so I'm going to go ahead and delete some of the older ones. I'm using version 2 or whatever. So I'll delete that. So when you import a LUT that you want to bake into your footage, so this way you don't have to do it in edit. You could if you wanted to, and that gives you a lot more flexibility to play around with the stuff. But in this case, let's say I import a LUT, right? When you import a LUT, this is what you're going to see. You can name the LUT to whatever you want it to be named. So I'm just going to go ahead and call it S-Log3, undone TUT for tutorial, just so this way I don't confuse it. You got to dial in your settings here. So it says color space. It says BT709. I would go ahead and change that to S-Gamut3 and then source transfer function. Bring that to Sony S-Log3 and click OK. Right. And so now it'll be saved in that drop down menu. So this way, when I go to it's already imported. Right. So now I just go back and then from here, you'll see TUT. If I wanted to select that, it's there. Now, if you wanted to get rid of a particular LUT, in this case, that one, you just press the X button and it's gone. Now you'll notice that there's no LUT applied. And so from there, I'll just go back and select the appropriate LUT. And boom, you've got your LUT set up and you're almost ready to shoot. Let me just go ahead and walk through a couple things. So right here, these are your essentially exposure, white balance, and focus settings. Straightforward. You basically press that button and it'll allow you to change your shutter speed. Same thing, your ISO settings. But normally, I'll just keep that exposure facet on auto unless I really want to dial in. And the only instance in which I find myself dialing in any of those settings is when I'm trying to capture something like the moon or the sun. So if I'm trying to capture like a sunset, I'll just go ahead and then manually dial that shutter speed up or that exposure all the way down. And then from there, if I want to change the focus as well, it's the same idea, right? Um, Infinity, if you want to get closer to infinity, you have to scroll towards the bottom, and you want to get close focus, you just scroll up to the top. And now, when it comes to white balance, you can set your white balance as well manually. But again, for these exposure, white balance, focus settings, I'll just keep that at auto. I want for the most part, the phone is pretty good. I believe the phone also the phone has like lidar built into it, so its focus is actually really good. So if I showcase, you see that what's it called? It's not focusing. There you go. So you see that, right? It's there's that lidar thing that's active, right? And so as a result, there, yeah, you can actually see it more clearly now. So that lidar is active, which I believe is helping with the autofocusing. So that's something to certainly keep in mind. So now let's go over to, let me just add the shading again. Your different camera settings. So you'll see different lens options here. Um, if I go here, okay, so if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can select which focal lengths you're going to be working with. So in my case, with the S25 Ultra, so I had noticed that there are two sets of 14 millimeter lenses here. Um, I just went with one of them. They both look the same to me. These are the ones that I selected. So you have here um, the so 23 millimeters is standard. Then you have your 63, 117, and then your 14 millimeter, which is your ultra wide. Now for the front lens, I used the 27 millimeter, which is the widest option. I don't think you would want to go tighter when you're, holding your phone out, um, as such. Oh yeah, by the way, this is what it ends up looking like, but we'll deal with that later. But anyway, so you can select whichever lenses that you want to shoot with, or you want to see enabled when you're choosing your lenses. Now, there's a couple ways to swipe between the lenses. So you can either swipe, just like swipe right on the lens itself, that essentially allows you to pick the appropriate lens that you want. You keep swiping until you get there you go. So that's the front lens. And now, once you've chosen, and you're going to have to dial in your settings for each lens, whatever settings you choose, it'll remember those settings, but it's the setting, it'll keep those settings for that lens itself. The few settings that you want to either enable or disable depending on your shooting methodology. If you're shooting on a gimbal, whether it be like an Osmo or Insta360 Flow or whatever, and you're not looking to do any post digital stabilization, i.e., gyro flow, then my advice is to turn on optical image stabilization. There is an actual OIS in the camera itself, and this shows actually. You'll see that difference a lot more in a situation where it's a so this is OIS at 63 millimeters turned off, right? I'm slightly shaking the camera. I turn it on, right? And I'm slightly shaking the camera. You see the reduction of that. Now there are micro jitters that do take place even when you're holding a gimbal, and so turning that on will actually get rid of that. It's even more pronounced when you're shooting at 117 millimeters, right? So if I turn off the OIS, this is how shaky that is. I turn it back on, and you'll notice how much more stable that is. Now, I personally prefer to keep the OIS enabled for 63 and 117 millimeters, regardless of whether or not I'm on a gimbal, because I won't do sweeping, moving shots. I'm usually just standing still in the recording of that, in the recording of these lenses, focal lengths. However, with 14 mil, I'll typically keep it off. At 23 mil, I'll typically keep it off. And the reason is because usually if I'm shooting at 14, 23, and even sometimes 63, I will stabilize that digitally in GyroFlow. There's a couple things that you're gonna need to keep a note of. If you're shooting on a gimbal, you can just shoot it, whatever the shutter speed is, whatever your settings is, auto, you can shoot it and put it into GyroFlow and it's gonna look even better. However, I have noticed that when I shoot at 117 millimeters, the stabilization in GyroFlow is not necessarily as good as the optical image stabilization that I get when I pair it with the gimbal as well. However, with the 63 millimeter, if I'm have the phone on a gimbal versus turning this off and using GyroFlow, regardless of whether I'm on a gimbal or not, it's about 50-50. And so I might actually prefer to keep it off if I'm in a bright situation. But if I'm in a low light situation, then I'll turn it on for sure. So the next element is where I believe the quality of the image really helps improve. All of these things I turn off. I turn off noise reduction, sharpness, tone mapping. These are all computational style. These are all AI phone-based processing, which I find extremely annoying. I don't ever want to use these. It just makes the footage look really bad. If there's going to be any noise reduction to be applied, any sharpening that has to be done, I'll take care of it in the edit if it's so needed. But generally, when this is disabled, the footage just tends to look good. When it is enabled, then the footage tends to look really muddy. I think that's just the nature of the footage being captured on a smaller sensor. Keep that noise reduction off. And so viewfinder resolution, I'll keep that at auto. Show viewfinder resolution toggle, keep that off. Advanced settings, vignetting, I'll correct that. I try to get as much of a clean image as possible. Vignette correction is good for that. Let's see, and that's basically it for dialing in your settings per lens. You're gonna have to do this with each lens. And so, because there's different sensors attached to each of these lenses, and so that's why you have to dial those settings in. Once you've dialed that in, the next bit is the resolution. So recording name, I'll just keep that as name default. Now, capture resolution. This is where the real benefit of using something like MotionCam is advantageous. MotionCam allows for what is full sensor width. Now, out of all of these options, I will ask you to pay attention to only two. Either full sensor, right, which gives you open gate video, essentially, right? You'll notice it's a 4:3 aspect ratio. Whereas if I use sensor width, what that does is you'll notice here at the bottom, the resolution is not 3840 by 2160, but rather it is 4080 by 2288. Now, if you record in this resolution, you might have some issues with sharing that video on different platforms, maybe on WhatsApp or whatever, because it's an odd resolution, it's not a standard resolution. That's why when I say record sensor, full sensor, versus recording at 3840 by 2160. And so this is essentially now the same. Yeah, there you go. Now it's 16:9 mode. So if you want to record and edit and share as it is, without any formatting, then that would be the resolution to go for. But if you want open gate style, all right, now you've got more vertical resolution. But if I go, let's say full sensor, you'll know you saw how it punched out a little bit, right? Whereas if I go, boom, see, when I went to 4:3 versus full sensor, boom, it punched out a little bit. Same thing here. Let's go to sensor width, 16.9. And then if I go 3840 by 2160, 16.9, it punches in a little bit. So there is some sensor cropping happening at the specific resolutions that you pick. That's why I choose full sensor. Now, the reason for choosing full sensor is because I will then, whatever footage that's recorded, I will then bring that into GyroFlow within the phone. And then I will tell it to stabilize. And I'll do another video on how to use GyroFlow on your phone, especially with relation to footage that you've captured using MotionCam Pro. We're almost done. The next bit that I want you to look at is your resolution settings. Typically, so these are obviously the supported resolutions. I'll just choose 24 just as a standard. You can choose 30 as well. I think between 24 and 30, you'll get reliable footage. Obviously, you got unsupported frame rates here, so don't worry about those. And then we've got general settings. It's nice to see that you have an audio meter turned on, you have a level meter turned on, display grid. I'll keep this on. And the reason for the display grid here is many times if I'm recording video that I know that although I'm capturing full sensor, open gate style, but I know that if I'm going to edit the video and I'm going to be distributing that footage into a 16:9 format, either for YouTube or whatever, what I will do is I will keep the footage, whatever I'm composing, in between these lines. And so this way, after I've stabilized in GyroFlow and I have gotten my crop for transferring this 4:3 aspect ratio into a 16:9 aspect ratio, I know everything that I compose for is safe. So these vertical lines is what I'm composing within. So that's why it's different from your rule of thirds. This is a 4:4 grid. And so this way, everything here is safe. And even if I want to go vertically, everything here is safe as well. So that's why I keep this grid on, just as a reminder for myself, whatever I'm composing for, to keep it within these particular lines. So that's part of the display grid. What else we got? Lock exposure on record. I'll keep all of the remaining um, settings turned off. Focus peaking, I'll turn on. And save gyro data. This is the feature that I highly advise that you turn on. And the reason is because when you when you record video, the phone will also save a .gsv file, which records all of your motion data. That file, if it's in the same folder as the video, when you import your video into GyroFlow, then it'll automatically detect that GSV file. And so you won't have to import it separately. And so now there's other features here that you can take advantage of. So if you've got like a depth of field adapter, i.e. if you want to mount any like Canon EF DSLR lenses or whatever onto your phone, kind of like how they do it in movies and many of the like the Apple presentations, they'll use like cinema lenses and whatever. They're using a depth of field adapter. So if you have that, and what happens is that the image gets flipped to be upside down because any image that's coming in through a lens, typically if you look through the lens and you focus up, you'll notice that the image is upside down, and that's just the very nature of light, and the image ends up getting flipped when the light travels through a lens. And so you're telling the camera to go ahead and flip it so this way you're seeing and you don't have to kind of get confused because you're looking at everything upside down. But that's just a fun feature, great feature to have. A few more things if you want to look at some of these features that are in the top right corner of your phone. So this first option here is just brightness settings. I'll just keep that at the brightest so I can see it, so I can see my phone essentially. This here is if you need to see, this basically shows you what's being captured versus monitoring in terms of the dynamic range and stuff. I'll just keep that off for the most part. Um, And this is a feature that's important if you're recording raw, um, but we're not. We're recording direct to log. And then you've got your levels. I don't pay attention to this. I just basically eyeball it for the most part. There's just your info button if you wanted to connect to MotionCam YouTube and stuff, but I don't pay much attention to that. And that's basically your quick and easy walkthrough of MotionCam Pro on your phone. And this way you can unlock your phone to record reliably. One thing to note is that there are instances now, although the Samsung S25 Ultra using Motion Cam um, unlocks the video capability of your phone, understand that it is also there are limitations in the sense that this is not a it's not the kind of device that you would use to record like a long form video, unless you're mindful about its limitations. Like I've done like an hour long recording with this, but I didn't record continuously for an hour long. I will record 4 or 5 minutes at a time. And so, because continuous recording without any external cooling device attached, i.e., a fan, will result in dropped frames and messed up video. Uh, and even with a cooling fan, if you're out in like 90-degree temperatures, which is typically the case 8 months out of the year in Houston, then even with the fan, you're not going to get more than like 7, 8 minutes of reliable recording. However, indoors, where it's air conditioned and climate controlled, I've recorded upwards of 30 minutes reliably using my phone with external cooling. But without the external cooling, I can get anywhere from like 3 to 7 minutes without any issues. And so, regardless of whether you have any issues with the footage, this is where using an application like GyroFlow will help potentially resolve any issues along the way or make any of those issues very glaringly apparent. And that's why sometimes where if I'm recording and I forget that I'm recording and I've recorded for more than 5 minutes, that there's going to be some skipped frames. And that kind of becomes apparent in the edit when I'm using Premiere. And so that's where it's good to have B-roll and additional clips that you can layer on top of whatever footage I got messed up. And so I hope this video is useful. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any further questions. And stay tuned for the next video, which I'm going to be recording immediately after this, that goes over the use of GyroFlow, which is, in my opinion, an important companion to MotionCam Pro on your phone. I'll see you soon.